Year 10 and 11, welcome to your preparation for the Unseen Poetry on the AQA English Literature Poetry exam. When reading the Unseen Poetry, we must understand the meaning of the poem, the voice/speaker of the poem. Sometimes the speaker is not the poet, sometimes the poet has made up a character. If you're doing AQA Poetry, in the conflict section, there is a poem called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Robert Browning has created a persona who is the speaker in the poem, the Duke. So be very careful when you're looking at the speaker because it is not always the poet. We need to understand the language used by the poet and why, so our language devices will come in there. We need to be able to analyse the structure of the poem. And finally, what themes are being explored. Now, in AQA, you have already been branched off into different sections, so there's relationships and there's also conflict. But there'll be deeper themes embedded within each poem. We will begin with structure and punctuation. Those students looking for a level 7, 8 and 9, i.e. a B, an A and an A star, should pay close attention to the structural devices and the punctuation used by the poet. Okay, your first piece of terminology that you might want to make a note of is free verse. Free verse means the poem does not rhyme. There is no rhyme scheme. So once again, you want to be thinking about, if you identify that the poem uses free verse, what does it add to the poem? A lot of times students say it adds a serious undertone or somber mood. That's absolutely fine, but that won't always be the answer. So free verse means the poem does not rhyme. You need to ask yourself what that adds to the meaning of the poem. Okay? Next is your rhyming couplet. A rhyming couplet is 2 lines of the same length that rhyme and complete a single thought. There is no limit to the length of the lines. Rhyming words are words that sound the same when spoken. Okay, there's an example there. Sorry, I've missed off the T on the wind blew very strong as we scurried along. So rhyming couplet, the words obviously sound the same when they're spoken, and in a poem they're on top of each other. It's one on top of the other in a rhyming couplet. If you're doing a Shakespearean sonnet, they always end with a rhyming couplet. Once again, you must be asking yourself, what do they add to the poem? Why is it that the poet has used rhyming couplets? Alternate rhyme naturally differs from a rhyming couplet because the rhyme is not one on top of the other, it is every other line. The word alternate gives that away. So your example there is, you can see it goes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. So the rhyme alternates. On shallow straw in shadeless glass, huddled by empty bowls they sleep. No dark, no dawn, no earth, no grass. So that line rhymes with the top line. Mum, get us one of them to keep. So line 4 rhymes with line 2. Line 1 rhymes with line 3. Line 5 lines with rhyme 7. So it's an alternated rhyming pattern. Once again, our question when analysing unseen poetry is, what does it add to the poem? Why is it that the poet has chosen to alternate their rhymes? What does it add? Because it certainly gives you this almost up down type of rhythm. Okay. Our next structural device is enjambment, and that is the continuation of a sentence or a clause over a line break. So in layman's terms, in simple terms, the poetic line does not end with a piece of punctuation, it carries on to the next line. So for instance, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of air. So if you look very closely, we can see there's no punctuation. There's no punctuation. So your enjambment is being used there because the line carries on to the next line. Okay, so it is the continuation of a sentence or a clause over onto the next line. That is your enjambment. Again, we've always got to be asking what it adds to the poem. Is it that the poem flows better? Is it that it creates a fast pace? Is it that it adds to the idea of natural speech? Is it that the reader is unable to stop something from happening? Again, why is enjambment used? Almost the opposite of enjambment then is caesura. Apologies about my pronunciation of that word, I really struggle to pronounce it. And that is a complete pause in a line of poetry. Now I'm going to bring up an example now to show you what I mean. So we are looking at caesura. So remember that is a complete pause within the poem. So for instance, we've got one here. You've got one there. You've got the commas there. You've got a full stop here. You've got comma. You've got full stop. You've got comma. You've got full stop, comma, 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 full stop, comma, comma, full stop. I mean, I need not go on, but you can track all of the punctuation used in this poem, which is called Poppies, by Jane Ware. Again, asking ourselves why. Why is it that the poet has used a lot of the caesura here to break the poem up? I don't know if anyone watching the video is studying Poppies, but it is on the AQA Literature Conflict section, and I would say that the reason caesura is used here is because the mother has lost her son. Her son has gone to war and died, and she is recounting her memories of the son. And I think the caesura is her trying to calm herself down in the face of this emotional memory of him being a child and him going to war. So she tries to calm herself down, and that is what the pauses in the caesura represents. Unfortunately, she's unable to do that. So that's just a quick example of caesura. So it's a complete pause in a poetic line. Our next structural device is regular stanzas. Dead straightforward. All of the stanzas are the same length. So I've just used war photographer here. All of the stanzas have 6 lines. Again, the most important thing is explaining why. Why has the poet used that type of format? It's just an eye test recognising, isn't it, really? Everybody can see there that the stanzas are the same length. You have to explain why. What does it add to the poem? Again, if anyone is doing war photographer, my interpretation of it is that this man who has watched chaos unfold before his eyes in the form of war and the death of many soldiers, I feel like the regular stanzas is the guy, the photographer, trying to restore order to the world, trying to restore chaos to what he has witnessed, trying to get some control back of his life and his emotions. If anyone's done Your Dad Did What by Sophie Hannah, she uses regular stanzas, and it's a very rigid structure because there's a teacher that doesn't like students disobeying her, so that, you know, the rigid regular stanzas represents the routine of the teacher, the strict routine she sticks to. Exposure uses 8 stanzas that are all the same. The war poem, again, it's this strict military structure and military routine that soldiers have to follow. So that's just a couple of examples. But regular stanzas are that the stanzas are the same length. Again, we need to be asking ourselves why and what does it add in terms of meaning to the poem. The opposite of regular stanzas then is irregular stanzas, and that means that all the stanzas are of differing lengths. I have an example of that on the following slide. So if we look at Blessing by Imtiaz Darga, a wonderful poem, especially good for practice and analysis as well. All of the stanzas are different lengths. So you would see here that Imtiaz Darga uses irregular stanzas. Again, what you need to do though is provide an answer as to why. So why is it that she has chosen for the stanzas to start off short and then get longer and then get shorter again? Yeah. Again, you're talking about what does it add to the poem in terms of meaning. I'm going to come back to analysing Blessing as an example in a couple of minutes after we've looked at language. Then we come to punctuation. Remember, punctuation is for our top grade students, our level 8, our level 9, our A/A stars. You do need to look at punctuation because a poet will have used it on purpose. We should know all the punctuation marks by now. There's a couple obviously on the screen there: brackets, hyphens, exclamation, question marks, ellipsis, speech marks. You need obviously to have a reason though. You can't just outline that a poet has used a comma if there's no importance to it. So for instance, why might a poet use punctuation? I've just put a few ideas there. I'm not saying they are all right, but to make a certain idea stand out. So for emphasis, makes the poem flow, makes the poem disjointed and broken up. It can make the poem faster, or it can slow the poem down. Okay, so again, you've got to be asking yourself about punctuation. If it's used, is it important? If it's not used, why not? A poem that rings a bell, I don't know if anyone's studied it, is Half Caste by John Agard. He uses very little punctuation, very little. I think there's 2 slashes or something like that in the entire poem, and the poem's quite long. So you need to explain why he avoids punctuation. So if anyone gets a chance to look at Half Caste, have a look and ask yourself, well, why doesn't he use punctuation? Why does he use enjambment on every single line? Okay. We're going to move on now to look at some language devices. They should all be straightforward, really, so it'll just be refreshing your memory. So what types of language devices are we looking for in poetry? Similes, metaphors, personification, alliteration, repetition, emotive language, pronouns. Those are the main ones. Obviously there'll be others, but these are the main language devices we should be looking for, or we should be able to identify in any given poem. So, based on all the terms we've used, it's time to put it into practice. So we've got the poem Blessing in front of us, okay? So blessing. The skin cracks like a pod, there never is enough water. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts, silver crashes to the ground, and the flow has found a row of tongues. From the huts a congregation, every man, woman, child for streets around butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands, and naked children screaming in the liquid sun, their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light, as the blessing sings over their small bones. So, in terms of structure, we can see very clearly that the poem does not rhyme. So the poem uses free verse. Now we need to be asking ourselves why. So our first reading of the poem, we know it's about water, the lack of water. To be more specific, you have got a place in Mumbai, obviously a very deprived place, where the people are dying of thirst. They're desperate for water. Okay. Now, we need to be thinking about why Imtiaz Darga has used free verse. Now, as I said earlier, a lot of people think free verse adds a seriousness to a poem. Yes, it does. And this is a serious topic. So yes, we can use that in our interpretation. But in terms of free verse, you're looking at things like the people have lost a sense of freedom because they have lost one of their basic human rights, which is water. We all know that humans need water to survive. They don't have it. They are dying. So the free verse highlights the loss of some of their human rights, the loss of their freedom, the freedom to have what everybody else has. On the flip side of that, the free verse also highlights what we take for granted, us, the people who do have water. And we do take it for granted. We get up every morning, we wash our face, we get a drink of water, we fill the kettle. We don't think that we are blessed because we have it. So the free verse works in 2 different ways there. Well, 3 different ways. 1, the seriousness. 2, the freedom that the people have lost, one of their human rights. And on the flip side of that, the freedom that we have to get as much water as we want and take it for granted. Next, in terms of structure, is Imtiaz Darga uses both enjambment and caesura. So some of the lines run on. So look, a rush runs on to the next line. Ground runs on to found. Found runs on to a row of tongues. Woman runs on to child for streets around. Around runs into butts and pants. So she uses a mixture of enjambment and caesura. Once again, got to ask ourselves why. Now, the enjambment builds up a fast and frantic pace because when the pipe bursts, all of the people rush over to the water. The women and the adults try to collect the water in pots and pans, and the children just run through it. Now, I want to ask you to do what I do here. I'm going to take a breath and read a section of the poem that doesn't particularly stop. I mean, there's a few commas, but there's no full stop. And you'll hear how quick and frantic the poem becomes. So here we go. So you've got, sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts, silver crashes to the ground, and the floor has found a roar of tongues. From the huts a congregation, every man, woman, child for streets around butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands, and naked children screaming in the liquid sun, their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light as the blessing sings over their small bones. The enjambment builds up a fast, furious pace, which is a mirror image of the people who are frantically trying to collect the water, because obviously they need it and they really need to use it before it runs out. So the enjambment builds up that fast, furious pace. I mean, some people argue that it's a representation of the water rushing, and that's absolutely fine. But then we need to go to her use of the caesura. Imtiaz Darker's use of the caesura in this poem. Now, it sounds really silly, but if you take away all of the words in the poem and you just leave the full stops and the commas, you can visualise that there. The whole page is dotted. There's dots all over, and her use of punctuation and her use of the caesura represents the water fallen, the water that they have prayed for, that they have longed for. I hope that makes sense. If we move on to irregular stanzas as well. So far we've got free verse, enjambment, caesura, then we're into irregular stanzas. If you're using terminology like that, with a decent interpretation, you're definitely looking at high marks in the poetry exam, because a lot of it is about interpretation, and a lot of it is about terminology. If we're in a poetry exam, we need to know poetic terms. So you've got to ask yourself, why irregular stanzas? Again, if we're looking really closely at the poem, we've got 2 lines, then 4, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then we slow down again to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if we follow the movement of the water in the poem, it starts with a drip. So that's, a little drip of water. Then it becomes a splash, so the water gets bigger. Then it becomes a sudden rush. Now, the stanzas in the poem are a mirror image of the water's movement. So the drip is the first stanza, 2 lines. The splash is the second stanza, 4 lines. And the sudden rush is the third stanza of 11 lines. Imtiaz Darker cleverly uses the structure of her poem to represent the movement of the water. Drip, splash, rush. Okay, so that is why I think she uses irregular stanzas. But don't forget, your interpretation will be fine. So, for instance, the irregular stanzas might actually highlight the fact that this is out of the ordinary for these people. This event that the pipe bursts and they are given water is out of the ordinary. It's unexpected. Okay. Naturally, after structure, we move to language. So what language does Imtiaz Darker use and why? Line 1, dead straightforward. You have got a simile. The skin cracks like a pod. Obviously, this simile creates the image in our heads of somewhere dry. The skin cracks like a pod. We've all had dry skin in the summer/winter, and it's awful. Dry lips and things like that. This image of the skin cracking like a pod shows us just how dehydrated these people are. And the onomatopoeia sound of cracks sounds painful. These people are dying of dehydration. And the first line is an image that highlights that. Then we have a straightforward, short statement. There never is enough water. It's factual, it's punchy, it's serious. Tells us everything we need to know about the poem. So next, imagine the drip of it. So again, we've got our onomatopoeias. So we've had crack, and now we've got drip, then we get splash. Our onomatopoeias allow us to hear the water. So we hear what these people in Mumbai hear and what they are reacting to. Imagine, odd word to have here, because if I said to somebody, imagine water, well, they would think I was stupid. We've all got access to water. That is the point here. these people in Mumbai have to imagine it as if it is a dream, as if they have to dream about getting water. That one word, imagine, shows us how deprived they are of this thing that everybody's got access to and that everybody takes for granted. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash, echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. So metaphor, the water becomes the voice of God. Why? Because their prayers have been answered. It is, they think God has delivered what they have been praying for. So we've got religious images here because obviously they've been praying to God for water. Water has arrived, so they think God is blessing them. Look at the word kindly there. They have forgotten that that they have been dehydrated and lacking water for so long, and they think that God is doing them a favour almost. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts and silver crashes to the ground. Right, we've got an extended metaphor here because it goes over a few lines. So first of all, the metaphor starts with the sudden rush of fortune and then silver crashes to the ground. Water here is metaphorically being represented as jewellery in silver and something that is a fortune. So this metaphor shows us how invaluable water is to these people. Once again, by comparing it to something like silver, it shows us how easily we take it for granted, that it is more important to these people than riches, than jewellery, than money. Okay, but again, your important word there is sometimes. So only sometimes do they get water, and in that word, we have a sad tone highlighted. The municipal pipe. So you've got to imagine that this is like a slum in Mumbai, but there's a pipe that runs past the slum to the city. So you've got a problem here in terms of wealth. You've got a slum outside of the city that is desperate for water, but a pipe with lots of water is running past them to the city. So there's an injustice, a theme of injustice playing here. So silver crashes again, onomatopoeia crashes to the ground, and the flow has found a row of tongues, metaphor, a row of tongues. It highlights the excitement of everybody. You can imagine, oh, the water's here, everybody's going to go and get the water. They'll be screaming. There'll be mass panic. So there's another metaphor. Then we get a list. From the huts, a congregation, every man, woman, child for streets around, butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands. And this massive list here builds up the panic of the people. When you read it, you can hear the mass panic and the jumping around and trying to collect the water because they've got to collect the water before it runs out. It's hysterical, and the list shows that. It's fast and it's furious. Notice the difference between the adults and the children. The adults try to collect the water. The children just run through it naked. Frantic as well kind of shows us there the reaction of people to the water. Naked children screaming in the liquid sun. A liquid sun's a weird one. People always ask me why liquid sun, why liquid sun. Again, can only give you my interpretation. People, plants, life need water and sunlight to survive. So I think the metaphor of the liquid sun is highlighting life-giving qualities, so water and sunlight. And remember, the problem in this poem is that they have one of those things missing, which is water, which is why they are dying. Their highlights polished to perfection. Look at the alliteration there. So the image here is that in the sunlight, in the water, these people are perfect, perfectly happy in terms of getting the water and surviving. Flashing light as the blessing sings over their small bones. Personification, the blessing sings over their small bones. The whole poem is metaphorical if we go back to the title of blessing, because the majority of the world don't class water as a blessing. So I think the title in itself becomes metaphorical. But it also cleverly makes us, the reader, question whether or not we do take these things for granted. Water, food, shelter. And the blessing sings over their small bones links back to God. They've prayed to God. God has answered their prayers, so they think that they are blessed. Okay, so that was just a quick example of how we can put all of our terms to a poem. If you want to go back and write down notes for all the terms I've given you, that's absolutely fine. Remember, the key thing here is once you've got the terminology sorted and you can identify it in a poem, you need an interpretation. So there's no good just finding a poem and going, Empty Darker uses free verse in blessing. Right? You've got to explain why. What does it add to the poem? It's all about your interpretation of the poem, of the structure, of the language devices. Okay, I hope this was useful. If you do want any more of my videos, just type in Stacey Ray to YouTube, STACEYREAY, and good luck in your AQA Poetry exam.